fanatic, religious, imperialistic vision, and there's no reason to assume that they are going to change their attitude once again if the U.S. sticks to its policy.
More terrorism, more trafficking, more nuclear weapons, more threats, more danger. It's a policy that is simply insane, including here at home. We have to let you go, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for your time today. Godspeed in your work at the Edgar Report. Come back to us soon. I hope the rest of you will do the same next time until they go forth and multiply.
They mock him.
I just think you're dumb.
Hillary's book blamed him.
A prominent Trump supporter, Aubrey Shines, produced an online video attacking me.
John Oliver mocks him, calls him a nut job from Tampa. Trump thanked him. So he continues to shine the light.
We can do better, we will do better, but we'll only make it happen if you are informed. That's what we're here to do.
America shines when you're connected to Aubrey Shines. Here's your host, Aubrey Shines.
Hello and welcome to America Shines. I'm your host, Aubrey Shines. The Florida State Board of Education has approved the new African American history standard for grades K through 12 that are drawing criticism for the framing of certain topics, including descriptions of slavery. One of the most widely criticized standards requires teachers to teach middle school students that under enslavement, some African Americans gained skills that later benefited. But what's really in the Florida curriculum? Is Black history being excluded? Did you know that they are actually trying to couple in the LGBTQ community with Black curriculum? We'll have to honor and respect those who have a difference of opinion. However, we're honored this morning to have with us someone to help us dissect the truth from the lies on this topic. That is Dr. William B. Allen. William Allen is an American political scientist. He has been professor of political philosophy and the dean of James Madison College at Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan. He is also a member of the National Council on the Human Rights and the Humanities, from 1984 to 1987, and he's chairman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights from 1988 to 1989. He is also the author of some great books. By the way, I highly recommend them. One is George Washington, America's First Progressive. And then the other, which is so dynamic, is Rethinking Uncle Tom, the political thought of Harriet Beecher Stowe. We have a lot to untangle this morning and a lot to talk about. So let's get started. Dr. Allen, what an incredible pleasure it is, sir, to have you with us today. I want to really just kind of jump right in here. There was a commercial, Dr. Allen. They were advertising Wendy's once. There was this little senior lady, kind of reminded me of one of my aunt. And she would often start out with, "Where's the beef?" I'm not finding where the problem is here. You're in the midst of this here. What's the problem with this curriculum?
Well, first off, Bishop, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you. It's been a long time since we were together, and I really appreciate getting a chance once again to do so. And in this Florida curriculum, let me say the beef with regard to the criticism isn't there. It is a beefless sandwich, only buns, no meat, because there is no substance to the criticism that this is not Black history in detail, in the full glory and horror of the whole experience. And what Florida has done is really remarkable. It hasn't been done anywhere else in the country. It's created a standalone curriculum, something that people who call themselves progressives have demanded for decades, and no one has ever given it. But Florida has now provided it so that you can measure how far in American history we are incorporating the story of those who were enslaved. And that's what this history does, from start to finish, from K through 12. It gives a framework that teachers are able to follow to present the story from the perspective of the people who experienced slavery. That was our chief criterion. Let those who live the stories tell the stories, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You know, I find it interesting and quite rich, Dr. Allen, because I always hear the argument, and I know you're going to stay with us for a few segments here, so I really want to take time because these are some of the pushback that I've often hear. I'm going to pull up some clips here in just a moment, but let me just kind of set the framework. One of them was from our own vice president. I think it's safe to say that anyone that's been around me know I try to be very astute. I did very well in debate. I never lost a debate when I was in school. And what I find interesting is that when they level this element of criticism, whether towards me, you, or whomever it is, they just talk about peripheral issues. They never get into the minutia of what they're really saying is really wrong. Dr. Allen, I want to show you this video clip. I want to come back and get you to comment. This is our own Vice President, Kamala Harris. Let's look at the clip.
Extremists here in Florida pass a law, don't say gay, trying to instill fear in our teachers that they should not live their full life and love who they love. And now, on top of all of that, they want to replace history with lies. Middle school students in Florida to be told that enslaved people benefited from slavery. High schoolers may be taught that victims of violence, of massacres, were also perpetrators. I said it yesterday. They insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, and we will not have it. And we will not have it.
Dr. Allen, I didn't hear her say anything, and maybe I missed it. Maybe I went out to lunch. What is our vice president talking about, sir?
Well, she's talking about what the National Park Service teaches, that during slavery, slaves acquired trades and other skills which inured to their benefit subsequently to slavery. She's talking about what the Smithsonian Institution includes in its teaching on the question. In fact, Bishop. She's describing what the Advanced Placement course in African American history says about the experience of people who were enslaved. That's what she's talking about, because those are the same words in those three sources that are cited in the Florida curriculum. But of course, she said something very interesting, and you have to notice. She said they're teaching that slaves benefited from slavery. She didn't say what all these sources said, that those who had been enslaved benefited from their skills. And moreover, we go beyond what the other sources say. We say it wasn't just skills gained while enslaved. Many of these skills, those who were snatched from Africa brought with them. And they, of course, developed further skills while enslaved. And they benefited before, during, and after slavery from what? From their God-given endowments, from their talents, from their skill, from their industry, from their determination. In other words, they were full human beings. That's what the history in Florida is going to teach. It's no longer the question of oppressed victims. You heard her refer to victims. Yes, of course, people were victims of the horrors and oppressions of slavery, but they were not only victims. They were full human beings, and they did not lose the ability to act as human beings. And they were able, because God gave them these endowments, to turn them to their own benefit. We are lifting up those who were enslaved to remind people to think and talk about them not just as victims, but as full human beings endowed by God with all the resourcefulness necessary to live a prosperous life. And to think of those who were enslaved that way means you no longer think of them as dependent, no longer wards of some superior class, which needs to take care of them. Because, as Booker T. Washington, as Frederick Douglass, and so many others said, they were capable of taking care of themselves.
Wow. Dr. Allen, we're going to come back with you. I have so many questions. Honestly, I wish I could keep here for 10 hours. The problem is my show only lasts 1 hour. We're going to come back with very distinguished emeritus professor, Dr. William Allen. You don't want to miss this. The questions that we're going to ask are going to settle a lot of issues here in just a moment. We'll be right back.
Rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
We have again with us today very distinguished professor, Dr. William Allen. I am a huge fan of his. We're going to keep just showing his book over and over again. Every one of you that are paying in our audience right now, you really do need to read the work. I think they're life-changing because it allows you to see a historical perspective that often we're not hearing, unfortunately, in this nation. Let's go by really quick here to Dr. Allen as well. Dr. Allen, here's one of the lies that I continue to hear, and I've actually on lecture before argued this, debated this topic before, and that is this idea, well, the founders were duplicitous. While they were talking about let's get rid of slavery, they themselves owned slaves. But yet, I just think a very small critique of history, if people really understood this, and you can correct me, sir, if I'm wrong, we were still under British rule. It was illegal to get rid of any slave because you would have been tried by the British government that still had colonized this country. Is my history somewhat accurate here?
It's certainly somewhat accurate, and it is also very important to know that in the long history of slavery, it involved the actions of many people of all races. And this is not to whitewash slavery. It is true, it was dominantly English and European in North America. It was the case that it was particularly horrid in North America. Why? Because the color line was introduced, which had not typically been introduced before. Starting as early as 1640, indentured servants who were black and white came to be distinguished based on their color, so that the one served for a term of years and then gained freedom, and the other had to serve for life. And then in the next period of history, there was another case where a slave in the Virginia colony, who had himself been an indentured servant, had been freed within the terms and had become prosperous and owned other indentures whom he claimed as permanent slaves. And he went to court and created the first legal basis for the lifetime enslavement of Africans. It just happened that he himself was an African. So you see, it's a complex picture. And in the Florida curriculum, we are showing the full complexity of it. Thomas Sowell, the very famous economist, has often observed that there were thousands of freed black people who owned slaves throughout the South. So when we talk about slave holding, we're not talking only about what was the predominant feature, which was, of course, the white persons holding slaves, but we're talking about the very idea of slavery as a violation of fundamental rights. And that's what was at stake during the colonial period. It is true, the British had sponsored the slave trade, and the Americans in the Declaration of Independence had tentatively attempted to protest that. But that was ruled out by the slaveholding delegates to the convention. But those slaveholding delegates to the Continental Congress that adopted the Declaration of Independence, they were not the only ones. The governor of Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And as early as 1764, he had declared slavery to be a contradiction to the principle of liberty for which the Americans were going to fight. So that what we had was a tension in the country, a tension that had been building up from 1609 between abolition and enslavement. And it was a tension that ultimately yielded in favor of abolition after a long, slow, and painstaking process. Too slow in my mind and the minds of many, But nevertheless, in the human scale, looking at it through centuries, it was a continuous development and progressive development. I look at this, Bishop Shines, much in the way I look at Genesis 39, which details the rise of Joseph as a slave and a prisoner in the house of Pharaoh, who emerges ultimately into the sunlight of Pharaoh's chief lieutenant and who is responsible for the full prosperity of the Egyptian society. That experience is not unfamiliar to us. We have had a similar role in the United States. And so in the colonial era, in the founding era, people debated this question. Yes, they had to yield for the sake of union to those who held slaves and who refused to associate on any other terms. But they committed themselves to a more perfect union and worked towards accomplishing a more perfect union, which meant a union without slaves.
You know, while you were saying that, you made me reflect on something. I was in California several years ago, and I was addressing a very large ecumenical body there, and we were talking about various challenges that so many have in our nation regarding this topic. And I said something that so many of these dear men afterward came and said to me, we didn't have any idea. I said, no, don't take my word for it. Let's take a peruse through the history book and let's find out if this is valid. If it's so, then you're going to have to change, brethren, your narrative. And this is what I said. And again, I would love your input here. When our founders then finally got to this culmination, Dr. Allen, and they said, okay, we're finally here. We've established. Wasn't one of the first things that they did was begin to free even the slaves, quote, that they had, Dr. Allen?
Several of them did, in fact. It started early. It started in Rhode Island. It started in Massachusetts and Connecticut and descended. And of course, it was reached its apogee at that early period in the will of George Washington, who had begun during the Revolutionary War to understand the wrongness of slavery and who committed himself to putting his affairs in order so that he could emancipate his slaves. But he did so in a very interesting way that people should remember. He did not simply say to the slaves, sorry, this was all a big mistake, you can go. Because after all, where did they have to go? How were they going to provide for themselves? So Washington accepted his responsibility upon ordering their freedom upon his death. He left his estate in a condition to provide the necessary support so that they could make the step into freedom, not abandon, but with the necessary provisions that would enable them to prosper. So this was characteristic of the era. Not to say everyone, let's be very clear. There were those who didn't get on board. Thomas Jefferson prominent among them, who never really took any steps towards trying to mitigate the excesses of slavery, and who had this particular and peculiar characteristic that it pretty much leaves us in the state we're in today. He, in 1784, published a book in which he introduced for the first time a description and defense of slavery on the basis of racial inferiority. And it was attaching the stigma of racial inferiority wrongly on Africans that came ultimately through the whole 19th century to create the almost irresistible force of slavery as prejudice, not just as institution. And that's what made it so difficult to overcome and required ultimately the Civil War to deal with. So yes, the founders were in the position. There are people like Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, and many others who were clearly abolitionists in their sentiments and in their conduct. But there were others who, of course, resisted. And that meant that we had to work through this dynamic of abolition versus enslavement for a very long period of time until abolition prevailed. That's the story of the United States. That's why the Florida curriculum is telling that story from 1609. And if I don't wear your patience out, and I don't want to do that, I will tell just one more story. Starting in 1609, there was a person named Stephen Hopkins who was part of the Jamestown colony. He was here, and he was someone who got in trouble in the colony because he spoke up in defense of the defenseless. He ended up going back to England because of his orphan children. But he also returned in 1619 as a Mayflower pilgrim. So he was part of Plymouth Colony, the real settlement that got this North American country founded and going. And in 1619, when he returned, he launched a family line that continues to this day in the United States, of which there are still descendants. But among his descendants, there was William Wells Brown, who in the 19th century was a slave held in Kentucky. Yet he was a descendant of a pilgrim, a Mayflower pilgrim ancestor. He escaped slavery, became a prominent abolitionist advocate, among many other accomplishments, including becoming an osteopathic physician in Boston. And his family still exists and covers, of course, white and black. And that's the story of America, our complex, integrated, not in a legal sense, in a factual sense, existence.
You know, I have just a few more questions. I got to pick this up on the next side because what you're doing is really giving us a real pure chronology of how this was chronicled, where we've come from, where we are. And in my opinion, it's always a directive of where we're going to find ourselves if we don't pay attention to history. Coming right back, Dr. William Allen. You don't want to miss it.
Shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever. Rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
I've had the occasion several times in my life not just interact and eat with, interview great guys, great girls, but this is certainly one of my top right now. I have to say that Dr. Allen and individuals like Bob Whitman, who I've had the just wonderful opportunity, and so many others, I probably shouldn't have share names because there's so many great men and women that I view as great because they have what I call a real grasp of where we are, not just in this nation, but where we've been as well. And I really believe something my deceased father would often say, and that is, if you don't understand where you've come from, you have the potential of repeating any era that you may move forward to. Why? Because if you don't understand what got you there, it's possible and probable you're probably going to repeat it again. Dr. Allen, I want to jump right back here because, again, you're laying out such a beautiful framework, and I often think about things of this magnitude. Every 4 years, and not that I subscribe to his philosophy, but I have to admit a lot of things what this gentleman said was true. The late El Malik El Shabazz, better known to us as Malcolm X, would say, and I can quote because I've said this so often, that one of the most detrimental things in America, to America, are liberal people. He was speaking primarily to blacks during that time. He says, because every 4 years they come around and they raise this idea of things that are going to be very divisive, and we buy into it, not we as a color, I'm talking about we as a people. I really don't like the hyphenation that goes on. I see myself personally first as a Christian that happens to have both a Jewish mom and someone who's non-Jewish as a father. With that being said, we always hear about reparations every 4 years. Even when the parties that are pushing this are in power, they never pursue it. If we're going to go down even this road of reparations, wouldn't it be safe, or should I say, is it safe, for us to at least go after the political parties that help perpetuate it? Case in point, the Democratic Party that fought against the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Am I off track here, Dr. Allen?
You're not off track, Bishop Shines, if you want to hold the people accountable who are responsible for the tragedies we have lived through. And that certainly includes the Democratic Party. It was the party of the positive good school of slavery. And one of the ironies of the vice presidents and other people's criticisms that Florida is somehow reintroducing the notion of a positive good is that these are the people who are repeating the arguments of John C. Calhoun and Roger Taney and the positive good school of slavery. It's also the case that these are the people who have, in a sense, taken responsibility to defend slavery, whether directly or indirectly. Even the New York Times, when it began in the 1850s, began by attacking Harriet Beecher Stowe and therefore defending slavery. And so if somebody's going to pay reparations, it ought to be the New York Times. Yeah. And it ought to be those who are at the forefront of the defense of that institution. But the reality is this: we are so complexly situated now that it would be next to impossible to determine who gives and who gets. I mean, even in my own family, just as in your
how would we do
family,
that?
I have the same complications. We can't.
Yes.
We can't do it.
I mean,
can't be done.
Because I've traced, Dr. Allen, my own lineage. I'm sorry, no one owned me. No one owned, quote, where I've come from. That's just a reality because there were so many people that were here in this nation that did not come as a result of direct slavery. I thought this was basic knowledge. Obviously, it isn't. I want to show you something, Dr. Allen, because again, I think this feeds into this narrative. We see these things on legacy media criticizing individuals like me, like you, like Ron DeSantis. Whether a guy or girl is voting for Ron, I'm not even here for that. But I'm here just to say we have to at least pay attention to what this guy is doing here in Florida. It really is phenomenal, especially in this area. Dr. Allen, I want you to take a look at this CNN clip. And again, tell me where I'm missing this. Let's go to this clip.
Your organization represents 150,000 teachers and also other education professionals. What are you hearing from them now with these standards passed?
Well, we've been hearing for a while from them because last year, again, Florida passed the Stop Woke Act. They also had a civics training that they did for teachers. And we were hearing from them about how it seemed like they were trying to rewrite the history, leave things out, talking about how the founding fathers in our country fought against slavery, but not talking about how they own slaves. So teachers are very concerned with what's happening and how we're narrowing the curriculum. And they're also very concerned that many of our students are no longer seeing themselves in their learning. And that is really, really important for kids to learn. It's one of those foundational skills that one of those foundational needs that kids have, which is to see themselves in their learning and how their learning connects to them. So when you say don't teach current events, when you say limit what kids can see and learn, that's a real problem for educators.
Dr. Allen, when I hear Andrew say something like that, we're not seeing ourselves in the education, then should those who are, quote, descendants of blacks that own blacks, should they see themselves as the oppressor? What about the whites that did not own whites? What about the whites that were owned by other whites? Should they see themselves as victim as well? Why do they keep doing this? What's their motivation? Your intention? I mean, I know we can't talk about a guy, girl's intention, but certainly they have an MO here. What is it, Dr. Allen?
Well, the MO is politics. When the Education Union brought Kamala Harris to Jacksonville to protest that curriculum, they did so in a context, and here's the context. The work group that created the African American history curriculum standards worked in open public session, invited all comers, not just to observe, but to contribute. The Education Union in Florida was silent for that several months long project until it was all completed. And then they staged a big press conference to complain about what was there, having said nothing while it was being developed. That tells you what it's about and what the MO is. They're not concerned with the facts of what's being taught. They're not concerned with what's being presented to the children. And here, look at this very subtle argument. Children should see themselves in what they're taught. Well, if you start with holding a mirror to children, rather than introducing them to other stories, you don't give them any critical factor. The mirror just feeds back the picture they already have.
Wow. Dr. Allen, we have one more segment with you. I can't let that go because, I don't know, I think that really personifies exactly where we are in this nation today. I don't care what the topic is if you're seeing what you're looking at, but that's unregenerated, there's a real problem. We're coming right back with Dr. William Allen.
And we'll fill the vacant ranks with 1 million free. freedom.
I think this is one of the few times in America Shines where I just wish this really could go on almost in perpetuity, because this is just remarkable, the data, the info, and this is why we have Dr. William Allen on. I want to just show you his books one more time. Everyone, please go out, pick this up. One of them is George Washington, America's First Progressive. Every American citizen really should take time to read this book. Wow, it's so powerful. And the other, of course, is Rethinking Uncle Tom, the Political Thought of Harriet Beecher Stowe. I think the data in there would just probably overwhelm you, and you would begin to learn that a lot of us, unfortunately, we're being fed a lot of garbage in our public system, and political guys and girls that are out there trying to score points, they're using false data to keep us in this divisive mind in this nation. Dr. Allen, I want to come back to the metaphor that you laid out. If they're taking a mirror and showing it to the kids, as Andrew there on CNN stated, if those kids' minds are not, rejuvenated with truth or with facts or with data, then are they not just looking at the same failed lifestyle that they've come out of? Dr. Allen.
Yeah, you have stated it so very well, because the picture they want the children to see of themselves is a picture of victimhood, a picture of want and oppression. And they don't want them to see power. They don't want them to see godly given endowments that lead to prosperity, because they want to blame a system. And let me give you one quick illustration of how this works traditionally. We've taught for a long time that there were conditions so horrible that there were revolts where slavery existed. Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner. But all those revolts failed. Yes, the people who led them were heroes. They were noble. They should be praised. We should teach those things. I wouldn't take them out of the curriculum. But there's one revolt that they almost never talk about, and that's the revolt in the Creole affair led by Madison Washington. It was the only successful slave revolt in the 19th century. Washington led over 100 people to freedom. It doesn't get talked about. It was successful. Washington was intelligent. He was commanding. He had fortitude. He had virtue. Things that should be celebrated. Because if you don't show a mirror through which people see their potential for virtue and intelligence and prosperity, you can't expect them to look to themselves to regenerate those conditions.
When Washington led that revolt, and I'm very familiar with it, maybe some of our audience is not, this is just a question I'm throwing out there. Why, sir, in your opinion, wouldn't an individual of that magnitude, with, by the way, success, why would that individual intentionally be left out of curriculum? Why don't we ever hear anything on a wider scale? Again, I concur with you. Let's celebrate the Nat Turners and the others for their heroic effort to desire to say, we don't want this anymore. I got that. But why are we not looking at the models that were actually successful? Is there an opinion that you have that would at least shed light on why this individual or individuals like him were not, celebrated? Dr. Allen.
There is, in my mind, and we can find it in the 1954 Supreme Court decision, majority opinion by Earl Warren, which broke down separate but equal, but which had a passage in it that revealed the truth. And that passage is that because of slavery, the Africans were not capable of providing for themselves. And the idea of perpetuating the notion that Africans were not capable of providing of themselves lies at the back of closing, obscuring, erasing the history of Madison Washington and erasing the stories of the people who lived through slavery that show their resourcefulness, erasing those things because it runs counter to the narrative that they were helpless. For some reason, some people want to perpetuate the vision of helplessness in our contemporary world.
Dr. Allen, I only have a few moments left with you, and I just don't want to miss, and I don't want our audience, obviously, to miss this as well. We're stuck. Here we are in 2023, and some of the same lies that have been told for, I don't know, decade after decade after decade. Every 4 years, it kind of comes back up. In your opinion, sir, why are seemingly this 13% population group called Black Americans, why are they stuck, in your opinion, as a whole, that they only see this myopic view of life, of history, and their future? Why do you think that is?
Well, unfortunately, Bishop Shines, some people buy into the false narrative conveyed by the expression, they're going to put y'all back in chains.
Oh, my.
Now, when you take that apart and analyze it grammatically, you realize he's speaking to an audience. And when he says y'all back in chains, he's implying that these are the people who wore chains. Well, nobody in that audience ever wore any chains. And I speak personally about this. I didn't, and I can see he's talking to me. But he sees me as a chain wearer. And he wants me to see myself as a chain wearer. So every time he says that, he is diminishing the audience he's speaking to. He's not lifting up those from the past who have been enslaved. He's diminishing those sitting in front of him at the moment. That's the goal, to drive into the heads of people today the expectation that they are chain wearers and that they must look for salvation from saviors.
Wow. I mean, I hear that. And again, I buried my father in the late 70s, and he was my champion. He was my hero. He was a very successful businessman. I never heard any racial epithets in our home. He fought against a lot, but he wouldn't allow us boys to believe it. He said to me one day, Dr. Allen, I came home, I had been filled with a lot of info from just a fantastic teacher. I have to give her kudos there. But some of the things I had not heard, and my dad was really good at making sure we understood all these dynamics. And I said to him, Daddy, why didn't you tell us this? Are these things true? And he said, yes. I said, wait, if they were true, why didn't you say it? He said to me, I'll never forget, he said, Aubrey, I've never taught you to respond to what people say about you. It's not what they say, it's how you respond to them. And it changed my life. At 17 years of age, that was a real defining moment. I'm looking at our nation, we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we're not looking at, in my opinion, sir, the issues, the laws, the tax basis, the things that really will make a difference. And again, it just seems like this one particular group that the politicians go after as if though they own them, and that is blacks in America. I don't see this, Dr. Allen, with my Asian friends. I don't see it among my Jewish friends. I don't even see it among my Latin friends. But I do see it among blacks. Even those very high-ranking clergy members, they seem to be stuck in this quagmire that they believe that they are a victim. You have a minute. Speak to them, which you will, because we're sending this clip everywhere. What would you say to them, especially our leaders, to help unshackle their minds? Dr. Allen.
I would say two things, Bishop Shines. I would say, first, remember who you are and remember whose you are. I'm reminded of the opening of the book of Ephesians when I say that. It says, remember who you are. And that means, of course, not allowing someone else to define you. Secondly, I would say, remember what the country is. You know, when I worked at the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, we published The State of Black America. And anybody who wants to look deeply into this can read that book and see what the background is for what the repressive arrangements. But then finally, I say this. Remember, Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells in 1893 celebrated the accomplishments of black people as the accomplishments of America and American principles. Recovery, that is what we need.
We're going to make sure that that info gets out. Dr. William Allen, what an incredible honor it was for me to be able to put you on the other side of the monitor and to be able to ask the questions. We're going to make sure that Dr. Allen, his material, where you can find him, is available to all. Let's stay tuned. We'll be right back.
shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Dr. William Allen is indeed, and I mean this with all sincerity, no flattery, I think one of the greatest political strategists, teachers that exist in the last 100+ years. He has a real laser focus. I've had the privilege so many times of breaking bread with him, hearing him when there are no cameras or radio that's involved. And what you see is what you get, you know, not just focused, not just centered, but just a wealth of historical data that's there. And when you do your own footnotes and you begin to kind of juxtapose what you've heard versus what you hear gentlemen and giants like Dr. Allen's referencing, you realize there is a attempt to make sure that we as a nation, that we're divided. That's why every single week here at America Shines, we do the work that we do. We take time, we do the research, because we know that you're not hearing this in other places. There's a reason for it. It doesn't make us exclusive in one regard. It just makes us a lover of this country. We don't want our country to fail. You can't put a skin color on that because it doesn't work that way. That's not what the United States it is really about. It's us being united, and it's us shining the light on these individuals that unfortunately that are trying to destroy us. Why did I take time to show the clips of people like Harris, VP Harris and CNN News? Because they are the conduits. They're the ones that are continuing to perpetuate these lies. For what purpose? To keep them elected. It's simple. It's about power. Don't you always find it amazing, at least I hope you do as I do, that the very people that make it, they're on top, they're successful, they're billionaires, they're millionaires, they have affluence, they would tell you, you can't do it. You're a victim. Your skin color will hold you back. Your gender will hold you back. But yet, these same individuals, like Kamala and others, they don't believe it for themselves. In other words, they have a superiority complex. They're superior, you are inferior. And if you buy into that lie, you will become that. This is why they want, and I cannot say it more eloquently than did Dr. Allen said. When we hold a mirror up, and that's what they're telling us to do, hold this mirror up because kids can't see themselves. Those are code words. If you're broken, you can't see yourself because once you do, you're only seeing a broken image of what you've always been. If you don't have the ability to go beyond what you're looking at, you'll only reflect what you've always seen. And if that's been failure, then that's all you're going to get. You're going to get this cycle of failure. This is why they do the work that they do. They need to stay on top. That way they can lead you. They are your new messiahs. They're your saviors. They're the voices that can lead you to the promised land. It's interesting to me that real leaders take people with them. They don't get there and then point back and say, but you're still not there and you can't get there because look at what's holding you back. But some kind of miraculous way with their same gender that they tell others in their gender, you can't do it. Or if you're a certain skin color, and if they're a certain skin color and they did it, but you can't do it. In other words, they got to the promised land. You can't get to the promised land. When I hear things about being an Uncle Tom, it's one of the things that I think I've heard, I don't know, probably more than anything. I want everyone to take a moment whenever you can, look at Uncle Tom. Read the life of who Uncle Tom, quote, was. You'll be shocked. It's actually a compliment for someone to call you that, but the way that the media has shaped it is you're a sellout, and they some kind of way attribute the story of Tom to a sellout. Nothing could be further from the truth. It has nothing to do with truth. We're coming up to an election cycle, and this is why I took the time to ask Dr. Allen the questions that I asked. Case in point, reparations. If we're going to, quote, have someone pay us back, shouldn't we go to the people that help form it? Now, for those of you, and I've done a show on this, and I plan to do another in the very near future, if we're going to get real reparations, here's a gong bell that all of us could begin to ring here. Why not go back to Africa where African leaders sold you? See, always go back to the source. I can't go and skip X amount of generations and then blame a new group of people for the problem that someone else created. Why not go back to the source where it started? Then, once we find those sources in Africa, ask the African leaders, hey, we want you to pay us. Why? Because you sold 20 plus million of your own people into slavery. Let's not look at just the United States that solved the problem, and we got billionaires and millionaires to prove it, and men that have gone all the way to the highest office called the United States presidency, Barack Obama himself. No, we can do all things if we trust in the God of the way this nation was formed. That's why we do the work. We'll see you next week.